Nobody here.
I believe we are live. Welcome everyone to a session of the Board of Education work session focused on curriculum. Today we'll be talking about assessment. We have several staff members with us and a speaker that we are very honored to have with us. I am going to hand it over to Dr. Mioli to introduce the subject in a little more detail. But first, we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If everybody can please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Rachel, we should do attendance also for the record.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, attendance too. I'm still adjusting to the fact that we're doing these as work sessions instead of simple committee meetings. You know what? Pat, do you have an attendance list? Do you want to take attendance or you want me to do it?
I can do it.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, Rachel Gillior.
Here.
Deborah Brooks.
Here.
Larry Greenstein.
Here.
Nora Johnson.
Here.
Emily Bays. Oh, okay. Emily Bays.
Here.
Julie Epstein.
Here.
And Beth Weisberg.
Here.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Mioli. We have a very exciting group of people to talk to us today. For the people that are watching, you should be able to have joined the Zoom webinar. And if you have questions, please raise your hand. And at the end, we will take questions and comments from the public. You also, as always, can email comments or questions to the entire Board of Education by emailing boe@portnet.org. Thank you. Dr. Mioli, I'm handing it over to you.
All right. Thank you. And welcome everyone to our Board Curriculum Committee meeting. I'm going to put up our presentation, I hope. And while I'm doing that, I will just remind everyone that over the past 2 months, we have talked about curriculum and instruction. And this is the third of the trifecta, which is assessment. We thought it was important to have kind of a common vocabulary and understanding of what all three of these things are and are not, especially as we move forward with our mission and vision work. And we have a number of guests with us today, but I think I'll introduce them as we go along. So let's see, I just need to move this so I can read it. Okay. So 2 months ago, we spoke about curriculum, which is the school's formal plan to fulfill its mission statement and expectations for student learning. And then last month, we looked at instruction, which was how that curriculum can be or should be delivered. And today we're going to complete the discussion of that by talking about assessment, how students can demonstrate achievement. So all three of these things are obviously very intertwined. There are lots of pieces that go together. But we're going to look pretty exclusively at just assessment today. So I just want to start with this because I think it's important. And speaking of tying in with earlier meetings, the root of the word assessment comes from the Latin for assidere, which means to sit beside. And I think that's a good visual to think about as we move forward. A lot of times we think about assessment as a test, which it is, but that has connotations of, different kinds of things. And I like this because it gives us that vision of assessment as someone sitting beside the student, that coach vision and that vision of someone working with the student to help them grow. So what is assessment? Assessment is the process of making judgments about students' progress and attainment. And it usually contains both a description and a comparison. So, for example, if I told you I spoke French, I wouldn't be lying. I probably couldn't get you much past the library and to make a telephone call from my high school 3 years. But if I said I spoke French like a native, now we're talking about an assessment. You can see that there's a piece there which gives you a rating and gives you an idea of where on the spectrum I have that talent or ability or proficiency, which I don't, by the way. So effective assessments should serve teaching and instruction, and I want to underscore that word serve, and enhance learning and growth, and I want to underscore that word growth. And it's really important that we have multiple ways to have students exhibit what they know. Another thing I want to talk about and have you think about as we go through our examples today is that not everything important is measurable. Some things are very hard to measure, and we do try with some success, but they're hard. And not everything measurable is important. And I think that's important to remember too. But what gets tested gets more attention. And, you know, I think it's important for us to pay attention to that because assessment really does play a critical role in the curriculum instruction and assessment cycle. So what does assessment look like? I think we have all seen or been, I'll say, victims of these kinds of assessments. Multiple choice, and they're kind of in order of, I think, sophistication. For me, from my point of view at least, multiple choice short answer tests, they're good for facts and knowledge. And most of our standardized tests are these types of tests, and they are for a very good reason because they're very efficient. When we test our entire state, you know, it would be hard for them to write 17 essays and have all of that scored and reported back. So it's a very efficient, but it doesn't give us as much information as some of the others. So grading, and we see our poor person over there with his F, is a collection of tests, assignments. It's heavy on comparison, who gets what grade, but it's kind of light on description. What exactly does a D mean? Does it mean the same thing from classroom to classroom, from school to school, from state to state? We all know that it probably doesn't. But again, nothing wrong with grading, nothing wrong with multiple choice. It has they have their uses, but they are limited. So today, in light of, again, our mission and vision work, I want to really have us look at two other kinds of performance assessments. One is performance or project-based assessment. And you'll have an example of that from our music department in a minute. But, you know, those are the kinds of assessments that can test skills, knowledge, understanding, and the success or quality of an event, like an audition or a sports event. And portfolio assessment, we're going to spend a good deal of time on today. And that allows us to collect a number of performances, assignments, tests, and other student work. And then we can collect those things, we can select them for different purposes, and we can have both the teacher and the student reflect on that work or that collection of work for different purposes. And Dave Nigadula is going to give us a really good background on that in a few minutes. So before I turn it over to our creative arts department, I just want, you know, this is going to be an example of a performance-based assessment. And just in case some of you watching are not familiar with rubric, I just want to indicate that, you know, there's qualitative assessment. I know. And there's quantitative assessment. That's how I felt when I was finishing my doctorate. And so a rubric takes qualitative, like a narrative kind of assessment, like what your doctor would write out after you go for an exam, and turns it into numbers so that it's easily scored and again compared. Remember that definition that I gave you in the beginning, a description and a comparison. So NISMA is New York State School Music Association, and they've kind of had the golden standard for rubrics and performance-based assessment for decades. And so I'd like to introduce our Director of Creative Arts, Kevin Scully, and then later, Tony Pinelli, who is one of our esteemed music teachers at Schreiber High School, to tell us a little bit more about these rubrics in the music department. Kevin?
Thank you, Dr. Mioli. So a lot of people have heard the acronym NISMA, and maybe they don't even know it stands for New York State School Music Association. NISMA evaluation festivals began in 1933, and the first NISMA manual, which I'll discuss in a moment, was published in 1946. Approximately 100,000 students participate annually in our adjudication festivals around the state that occur in the spring, late winter, early spring. NISMA evaluations can be solo, which many of you are familiar with, small ensembles, which do not happen quite as frequently, and large ensembles, which also are fairly frequent and are becoming more frequent in our school district. All instruments and voice are represented, and jazz is also represented for all instruments and voice. The all-state participants are also selected based on their NISMA evaluation, as well as other criteria, including previous NISMA evaluations, teacher recommendations, and things that they do outside of school and in the school to help their school music program. So Dr. Mioli spoke about growth, and to me, NISMA and the NISMA festivals completely key on growth. So the music difficulty levels range from level 1, which are for first or second year performers, to level 6, which are collegiate level performers. And students can progress through those difficulty ranges at their own pace. So it's not based on what grade level the student is in school. It's based on their skill and their ability to perform difficulty levels in an increasingly progressive manner. Students and their teachers select music from the NISMA manual. I have a couple small photos there. It's a very large manual that's divided into different instruments. It's very specific as to what the students can perform, but the students and the teachers do get to select, which is a great thing because no one's really prescribed to do anything specific as long as they stay within that NISMA manual. NISMA trained adjudicators assess the students' performance throughout the state. And that's for solos, for small ensembles, for large ensembles, and for every instrument. We also allow, NISMA allows for students that might not be as represented in the school music program, such as guitarists and piano players, to perform in NISMA as well, which we think is a great thing. And it definitely is an assistance to our students who are in our ensembles, but also play solo instruments. Next slide. So here are the NISMA scores and categories. Levels 1 through 4 for solo ensemble is a 28-point scoring system with ratings that are subdivided from that of outstanding, excellent, good, and needs improvement. And importantly, the students also get adjudicator comments. Levels 5 and 6 in All-State are a 100-point scoring system with traditional letter grades, and they also get adjudicator comments. Small ensembles also follow the scoring systems above. So if you're in a duet or a trio or a quartet, if you're doing level 1 through 4, it'll be a 28-point scoring system. And if you're doing levels 5 and 6, it'll be a 100-point rating system. And the major organizations, rather than getting scores with numbers, are allotted gold, silver, or bronze rating system and comments. Importantly, I put it in bold here in the middle. All performers can also elect to be evaluated with comments only. And this is really important, and it's actually becoming more and more prevalent, and especially this year with the way things are in different school districts and their ability to get music instruction. The student and the teacher can decide beforehand, and even right up to the moment of the audition, to only receive comments. And this way it remains a positive a positive experience for the students that might not be ready. And then there are also some teachers whose philosophy is such that they don't want the students to get a number grade or a gold, silver, or bronze. And they can still get the benefits of the Nismus system without getting those ratings by getting the comments from the adjudicators. So each performance evaluation sheet for every instrument, for every type of ensemble has subcategories. And this is, in my opinion, where the real assessment takes place. So Mr. Pinelli, he's not only a phenomenal music teacher, he's also an adjudicator for solos and ensembles and also for major organization. And he's also the chair for the entire state of New York for the orchestra, for the all-state orchestra. So he has a great knowledge of this, and he utilizes NISMA assessments in his teaching weekly. So Mr. Pinelli, welcome.
Tony, just before you go, I just want to point out to the audience before I change the screen that, one of the hallmarks of effective assessment is that it be fair. And you can see that as students, develop and grow in age, that the assessment system grows with them. So they are required to do more. And there are more things that they're rated on as they get older and get more accomplished. And that's something that you'll see in any good assessment. So Tony, thank you.
Thank you, absolutely. So as Dr. Mioli said, definitely the evaluations change and grow with the students. There's two different types of evaluations, and Mr. Scully discussed the solo and the ensemble. In front of you, I have what would be as if you took your band, orchestra, choir, jazz ensemble, vocal group to a NISMA majors performance example. And the categories on the left-hand side of the slide, going down tone, intonation, balance, technique, each of those categories have subcategories underneath them. Underneath tone, we have quality, clarity, control, and blend. And for the adjudicator to assess the performance of what's happening at the moment, they get to mark positives or needs of improvement spots and then comment verbally, which is what's fantastic. In a performance-based evaluation, the comments are the key thing. The number is secondary, only because the number needs to be created, but the performance understanding for example, would be is in the section between A and B in this piece of music that you're performing, I loved the sound that you created, the musical direction that you created, and the shape of the contour of the musical line. So as an adjudicator, I might say that type of thing during the recording of the majors performance, so the students understand exactly where, what, and how they did in a verbal understanding, rather than musical contour, a 2 out of 3. A 2 out of 3 means nothing without the understanding of why I got the 2. And like Dr. Mioli said, it changes as it gets older. Level 1 through 6, the evaluation gets more increased and more comments of what you would say and how you would talk. We even have the opportunity for the chance to meet the students before and after the event and talk with them as well. These categories are so important. And if you see the last little bullet I have on the form called the 5-mile expert, that to me is one of the most enjoyable things as a teacher, to invite somebody to come into my classroom and work with my students. It always means so much more. We are blessed, I truly mean this, as music teachers, that we build relationships with our students over multiple years. So we have a true understanding of a growth performance life. They move from one English teacher to the next, and growth does occur still, but I have the benefit as a music teacher to see that growth over the 4 years I have the students at the high school, and know how each individual child's growth occurs. If I brought in Dr. Mioli to come and say, hey, would you have fun with my orchestra tomorrow, and have him say something to them that was similar to what I said, but using different terms, it validates what they've done. And he might say, hey, that was really nice between A and B, what you did. And they heard it from somebody else that creates the positive feeling of what they're doing. My favorite part of NISMA majors, and this is the last thing I'll talk about that, is the last factor called influencing factors, where the students are evaluated from the minute they walk in. The 2 subcategories are discipline and appearance, and then appropriate choice of music. And these are very, very important for a performance-based evaluation. The students need to understand how they dress, how they sit, how they speak, how they turn the page in the middle of the performance. All of those things need to be set at a performance level of excellence and as if we were on stage giving a concert. We get evaluated by the entire audience twice a year during our concert season, but most likely people applaud. This is a true assessment for the event to occur and for them to get actual growth comments for them and praise comments for them as well. Sitting appropriately, dressing appropriately, but the choice of music is so important. Every ensemble is different every year, and we have all levels of performance capable students in one group. So we have to pick music that will be successful yet challenging. We never want the students to go to the level of performance and feel like they've failed at the event. So you always want to find between those levels 1 through 6 what's appropriate for your ensemble and how we can start maybe the year with a 3 and end the year with a 4. If we're lucky, we can maybe skip a level during the year because the growth of the students through the year has been that much. But it is so important for them to understand that the number doesn't matter. I've been playing 3 years, I need to do level 3. No, that's not how it works. I play at level 3 level. Like Mr. Scully said, it doesn't matter what age you are, it depends on your ability. Now with the ensemble, that's different. I always say to my class, we're unlike a sports team because we're only as strong as our weakest player. We don't have a bench. Everybody's in all the time. There's no first string. So we have to raise our level, everybody, to be at the level that we want. And it is so important for that to occur and for kids to understand that. Okay, on to the next slide for solo and small ensemble. Thank you. This form for individual performance evaluation is even more articulated in the subcategories than the major ensemble. So the major ensembles does a lot more verbal communication. This is written on the right side, as you can see the comments on the right, and then the pluses and or minuses on the left-hand side. Undertone, quality, control, projection, vibrato. Now these forms are specific to style of instrument and vocal. A vocal form would have different things. It would have diction. It would have specific techniques for vocalists. The band, woodwind, and brass form would have specific things related to brass instruments. And so the rubric itself is changed depending on the type of instrument that we're dealing with, vocal instrument or musical instrument. Even percussion has its own form. Jazz has its own form, and each of these rubrics are appropriate. Again, with the level 1 to 4 being 1 out of 28, the idea of this performance evaluation is to be as positive as can be for the kids, as any teacher should be, and as any evaluation should be for students. My favorite thing as an adjudicator is to go in and work with the first and second year students and listen to them play. Because you can go in as a judge and give them positive feedback in every category and give them a spot for improvement in every category, and they could still score what's referred to as an E with the excellent score. So they come out with this positive feel and the desire to want to increase and go on and continue on. When we opened the world of technology 6-7 years ago and cell phones became a standard thing, and we were trying to decide in school, was it worth having cell phones? Is it a problem? Is it a good thing? I tried to embrace it right from the start. I'm a bit of a tech nerd, and I loved the students having the ability to video record themselves and self-evaluate their performance of what they were doing. We joked about this the other day in conversation. My favorite thing is the conversation I had with a student the first year I had them record themselves and upload a video for me to evaluate for them, was they said, Mr. Pinelli, I had to record myself 13 times before I was happy with it. And I looked and I smiled and I said, you're right, I'm glad you did that. You know what they call that? They call that practicing and evaluating. So that to them was a wake-up call of, I'm just not playing, I'm actually creating, I'm evaluating, I'm basing my performance evaluation on what I sound like. And as we know, music sounds good or it doesn't. There's no kind of in between. So we always want to sound good and we want to perform at our best. So it's so important for them to understand the evaluation process on their own, as well as from other people doing it for them. It creates a mindful practice session for these kids. They go in and they really use this rubric. I will tell them, I want you to focus on your accuracy this week in the rubric of that what you see on the left. And I'll say, okay, what am I going to focus on? And I only want you to play these 8 measures, and I want you to focus on accuracy. So the rubric really can get very specific or can be very broad, but it gives them guidelines of what they need to do. And it gives them the opportunity to become constructively critiquing themselves and reevaluating on their own. I tell them, I only see them a couple hours a day, a week. They get to practice on their own up to 10 hours, 5 hours, 3 hours. They have to be their best teacher in a performance-based evaluation. They have to be aware of what they're doing. to make this continue on in a positive way for them. And my gosh, the end result is always fantastic. I adore what these kids get to do and the product that they put out at the end, for sure. I guess that's all I have to say. Dr. Muley, if there's anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Tony. I'm just going to point out a couple of things real quick, and some of them go back to the beginning of this presentation, and some of them kind of redound back to instruction and curriculum. So Tony talked about the importance of relationship between teachers and students. We've talked about that before. NISMA figured out a long time ago that what gets measured gets attention, and that's one of the reasons, I think, why we still have music in our schools. And it's really important that they develop this great set of rubrics, and I think it shows us the value of them. I also talked earlier about serving, teaching, and learning, and you can see how much that does here, and growth. Tony talked about that much more eloquently than I. And also student ownership. We've talked about that in all three sessions. The ability for the students to become their own teachers is really what we're after, because we won't be with them after they graduate. So all those things are important. And lastly, there's no surprises. When you sit down to a test, you really don't know what's going to happen sometimes or what questions you're going to be asked. But here, you know exactly every single indicator of what you're going to be judged on. And if you've practiced, you know what type of quality is expected for each. And so that's another great part of effective assessment. I just want to just give two other quick examples, because this is such an important component of assessment. So, I think NISMA is a great rubric. They have great rubrics, but just to give you two more pictures of what this might look like, and I know Dave Nigadula is going to do some more later as well. So with our new next generation science standards, a lot of what we're doing is going beyond science to engineering, because the engineers apply the learning. And so we have kids doing a lot more of this now in our classroom, designing a container to keep an ice cube from melting for as long as possible. So you have to know a lot to sit down and try to do that. And it's a great way to assess kids' knowledge and skill and understanding. And that's just one example. And obviously for performance, the sports, all sports are performance-based as well. So in a soccer game, you could assess the end of the game as a win or a loss. That's one way to assess it. You could also assess, and it's one of the reasons why they keep such great statistics in all sports events, how many, if you're a forward, how many goals did I score? How many passes did I make? And all of those types of things. So again, it's matching what you want the student to understand or know with the assessment. And that's really what it's all about. And performance and project-based is really a great way to do that. It takes more time, and it's harder to do because you have to really tailor it to students, but it's a great paradigm. So now I'm going to turn this over to Dr. David Nigadula. David is one of the founding members of the Coalition for Essential Schools at Brown University with Ted Sizer. He's been working on assessment for, I'm not going to tell you how many years, but a lot of years. And he's a great thinker in education. He's published, and he's been working on specifically digital portfolios for literally decades. And so I'm very, very honored to have him here today. And I'd like to introduce Dr. David Nigadula.
Thanks so much, Dr. Mioli. Appreciate it. Always glad to be with you all and taking a little time to talk about assessments. So really appreciate this, taking the time this morning to look at this, because it's really a critical element of looking at how schools can change. So when we think about assessments, particularly classroom assessments, the most common types of things, tests and quizzes and the like, always have a short-term question that they're answering. Did the students understand the material? Did they meet the standard? So we did the unit, the history chapter, whatever it was. That's what this individual assessment is supposed to measure. And we're very caught up in that as students, as teachers. What'd you get? How was my overall grade? But if we go to the next, and there's also long-term issues that we want assessment data to tell us. Has the student grown over time? Is the student ready to go on to, whether that's the next unit, the next grade, or are they ready to graduate? Are we ready to send them off for college or career? Is our student meeting our vision of a graduate? Now, any one assessment is not going to tell us that, and that's fine. What we can try to do is start to get a bigger picture of all that. So we go next. This is a close-up of a painting, and what you're seeing here are individual brush strokes. So you could see the blue, the orange, the yellow in there. And these, you could think of each individual brushstroke as one of the assessments, one of the homework, one of the things that gets a grade on it. And obviously putting each one on the slide, on the canvas is important. But if we click on this, and you can see as you start to zoom in on it, this piece, because if you have to take a step back, if you start to look at all the individual pieces together, you get a much bigger, richer picture, as we call it, of the student achievement. So this is obviously the famous Thoreau painting, the great example of pointillism. The idea is that, though, when you're looking at those individual elements, you may not get the whole picture. If we're really focused on the short-term stuff, it can be easy to miss the bigger picture here. So if we go to the next slide, what we want to do is make a connection between those individual assessments, what's going on in the classroom, and our long-term vision and mission. And the strategy that I want to talk to you about is what we've been doing with digital badges and portfolios. So if we go next. So just brief definition, a digital badge, many of you are probably familiar with regular badges, if you did scouting or things like that, but it represents a goal we have for our students. So writing, math, or the arts, academic skills, or things like community service or work habits. These can all be badges. These can represent what we think is important for a student to achieve at any grade level. And then we go to the next. Students earn their badges by collecting their best work into a portfolio. And we'll see some examples of that in just a moment. Now, when we talk about best work, that could be any type of assessment. It could be the classroom assessments. It could be the test scores. It could be the Nismus ratings we're talking about. Those would be fabulous examples of that. The summary, though, of what we're talking about can be summarized in 3 words: collect, select, and reflect. The idea of looking at the body of work. So that's sort of the key, and we're going to look at some samples of how that plays out. So we go to the next. So as Dr. Mayerly mentioned, we do have a consulting firm. I was with the Coalition of Central Schools based at Brown University, and we've been working with Rhode Island for a long time. And here in Rhode Island, something you should know, rather than a state examination like the Regents that you have in New York, there's a different kind of requirement. To graduate from any high school in the state, there's a set of what are called performance-based graduation requirements that each district determines. And what you're looking at here are 2 ribbons of badges, and that top row is what this school has said are our graduation requirements. These are the badges for all students. So at this particular district, you have to demonstrate skills in the arts, health and phys ed, listening and speaking, mathematics. They don't all have to be academic. You can see, for example, habits of mind or interpersonal skills. We work with the Rhode Island School for the Deaf. They have a badge around deaf identity. Whatever's important to them, to that community. So, but the idea there is that this ribbon of badges is the same for all students. If we click one more time, you'll see that there's a second ribbon that are specific to this student. So this particular student's interested in college readiness. They're particularly interested in robotics. This is the range of things that schools and district receive. So the opportunities they have. So being able to show, not just am I doing a science badge, but I did science fair. I'm interested in business. So maybe I participated in Skills USA or DEC or whatever. The notion is that this screen gives us a view of the whole child. Now, one other quick thing to note is that you'll see these badges are filled in to varying degrees. This is giving a visual representation. How far is the student towards achieving this badge? And that's trying to provide that visual idea. When we look at things like GPAs, averages tend to flatten things out. Knowing that I have especially for the kids in the middle, I mean, what does a 2.9 GPA mean? Well, maybe I'm consistent across the board. Maybe I do better in some classes than others. Here, this visual gives us a sense of how far along are you and where have you achieved, where have you made the most progress at this point? So if we click on, let's look in more detail at one of these. So let's take this writing badge. So if we click on it, each badge has two key elements. One is the requirements. And if you click here, you can see there's 5 requirements in this particular case. The report, narrative, persuasive, response, reflective, and writing. There's a question that came up, do you just like many places, you can earn badges beyond the minimum requirement. So no, you could technically have what's required for graduation. There's still credits in Rhode Island. So you're still needed to have 4 years of English and so on beyond the badges. But this is showing there's a level of proficiency across the board. But beyond the requirements, those are the same for all students, but each student is putting in their particular evidence. So for narrative writing, this particular student, if we click, put in the following evidence. They said, my best narrative was a project we did in terms of creating a trip to another country. So they had to choose a country from somewhere else in the world and talk about what it would be like to spend a week there. So this is the particular example. So the point is that in this system, you can go beyond just seeing the grade and actually get to the evidence, actually be able to look at the collection of work. And if we go on, now once the student submits it, a critical element of that is there has to be some kind of approval process. This happens to be a rubric that's used in a lot of writing, 6 traits writing, but whatever element of the students choosing, the teachers choosing to assess the work can be in there. So just to know that it isn't just a matter of students submitting things, it's a matter of setting up criteria, in this case a rubric, but whatever it happens to be, to say, yes, you've earned the badge. So if we click on, go on to the next. Doesn't Naviance do similar? We can talk more about that in a second, but Naviance is a different type of tool aimed at college and career readiness. And that's part of this, but we can talk more about the details in a second. But more to the point is beyond the specific system, whatever system you use, what are we going to do this for? How do we collect these assessments? So some things that it can do in terms of opening up opportunities for assessment is it allows student voice and choice, any kind of portfolio system. So if we click there and go to the next, let's take the idea of the arts. So like I said, in Rhode Island, every school district has an arts requirement. This is part of the overall proficiency requirements. But what each school has depends on the particular opportunities they have. So if we click again, in this particular case, the school has 3 options. Everybody has to earn an arts badge, but you could do it in music, you can do it in theater, you could do it in visual arts. Some students do more than one, and that's great, terrific. You can, you have the opportunity, you don't want to do multiple things, there's no problem with that. But again, that minimum set is that everybody has to do at least one. And if we click on the arts specifics, what this portfolio requirements in this case contains is the student has to have 4 original artworks using 3 or more of the following media: drawing, painting, sculpture, photography, and so on, at a level that's considered proficient. In the scoring process, that has to be at a level that's considered good enough. Now, the way this particular school is set up, a student can't do this all in a single course. So many of them, for example, will take the 9th grade drawing course. And here in this case is what the student submitted as their best example from that. And if we click to the next, we can see that we've got from the digital arts class, here is an example of a computer-aided design. So students can, from their specific opportunity, their specific learning journey, add the elements that they use their student choice to say, here is who I am. If we go to the next, where this ties together is in an overall reflection. So in order to earn the badge, the student has to put together, in this case, the equivalent of an artist statement you would see at a gallery. How does your collection of work represent your skills as an artist? What qualities are your strengths? Where do you want to improve your work? So this reflection on it is a critical element of the self-assessment. It's not just, yeah, I got a grade, and this is good enough because somebody gave me a 90 on it. Why was this good? What is it that you are showing about it? That's one of the key elements that we're trying to get at here. So that's one example. Another thing that Portfolios helps with is supporting new initiatives in assessment. So what does that mean? If we click again, let's look at the example in say, mathematics. So here, from a geometry class we've worked with, here's a set of requirements that they've said. Students need to demonstrate the following key concepts in geometry. They need to understand measurement, key concepts in vocabulary, proofs, and so on. And what's interesting is allowing this to go beyond, it's not saying that there are no on-demand tests, but to provide a place for these different kinds of projects and performances to appear. So here's an interesting example. One school, instead of a standard geometry midterm, had the students do a scavenger hunt. And we click on that. What the requirements were was that the students were given a set of concepts that they had studied in the first half of the year. And their task was to go and they had to take photographs of things in their community that represented each of those. So they couldn't be things just pulled off of Google. They had to actually find stuff in their home or in their neighborhood. And if we click on it, we can see some specific examples. So here is an example of an obtuse angle and a octagon and a cylinder. And the reason for that is to think about assessment differently. Just like Mr. Pinelli was talking about how the Nismus things are really a learning opportunity as well as an interesting assessment. This kind of assessment, what the teacher found is during the second half of the year, when the teacher refers to a cylinder, this student's going to think, oh yeah, the thing that held the rice cakes. Another student's going to have their idea of what their picture was. It makes sure that the kids know the knowledge, but it also provides a level of retention of that knowledge. It provides a reinforcement to make it stronger for the curriculum in the second half of the year. And going on, another example that can be helpful is to think about project-based learning. So projects, very common in the arts and in athletics. There's a lot of places where it lends itself to that. But it can also be a good application of the things in the traditional academic area, such as we take this example. So this was a geometry final project, and if we click on it, this is using a model of projects based from a group called the PBL Works. And every project has essentially launching, building, presenting, reflecting. The launching is an overview question. So what's the driving question here? How does geometry get applied in the world around us? And in this particular case, the students were asked to think about geometry and architecture. So think about the geometry of a famous landmark. So this particular student was looking at the Sydney Opera House, and if we click, they discovered, for example, that all the shells forming the roof are made from the same sphere. And it goes on about how the construction was specifically designed. Other students did things around the Eiffel Tower or the Chrysler Building or whatever. The idea that's important here is that the student is applying the skills that they've learned. So it's not just a test it and forget it kind of thing, but being able to say, do you have a mastery, a proficiency of what we really want you to take out of this class so that you're ready to go on to the next year or beyond? Okay, one more click. And just a last example here. Sometimes this can be useful for audiences beyond the high school. And this is part of what, if we click here, if we talk about college readiness. Now, an interesting thing, one of the question came up in the chat briefly was Naviance. Naviance is a terrific tool particularly for helping students think about the logistics of going to college. What do you want to major in and so on. But in some of the conversations we've been having with admissions folks and the College Board and so on over the years, if we click on this, there's a few particular things that are happening that colleges are looking for that don't necessarily show up in the admissions package. And this has been particularly pronounced during this pandemic time as large numbers of colleges have made test scores optional in their process. Some are going to do that for the next 3 years, for 3 years of admission cycles. But what happens is that the student can prepare something for an outside audience. In this case, this student put together a 30-second video about who I am and what I'm interested in. And I won't play the video here, but the idea is that she's talking about how she's particularly interested in science and healthcare as a potential major. And if we click again, what the colleges are saying they want examples of, you'll see the tabs across the top. Show me a piece of work that's connected to the major you're interested in. So again, the idea of, I've got this collection of work in my portfolio. What am I going to select to show that I've got skills ready? Here's another piece, the idea of independent work. Again, something that colleges say over and over. Can you, in terms of retention, can you handle the college schedule where you are spending fewer hours in class and are going to be doing more on your own? So the submission here, this happens to be a senior project from a student who studied shellfish repopulation. You can see that there. And they found a university professor who was doing this research project. The high school student in this case went off and went to the beach and collected samples as part of the process and learned more about that. The point of it is that this was done as a senior project in school, but by putting it into a portfolio, by having it available, it can also be useful for outside audiences. Similar things could be happening for careers. Okay, so that was a quick run through of some of the different samples. And again, every school has sort of approached this differently. But what has been common and what's critical about this is you want to build on the good work, build on the classroom assessments you already have. So these NISMA example that we looked at and a lot of the senior project types of things can be very helpful to that. So the idea also of portfolios can evolve with the developing vision and mission. So what we're trying to do overall with this work is provide a richer picture of the whole child. So again, thanks for your time. And let me turn it back to Dr. Mioli.
Thanks, Dave. I just want to point out a couple of things again, briefly to tie into earlier in the presentation and the past two. First of all, you couldn't help but notice how much of the work that you just saw was interdisciplinary. And it's one of the things that we tried to highlight under instruction. And I think it's effective instruction. And it's something that we need to think about as we move forward with our mission and vision. And second, I know we threw a lot of stuff at you, and believe me, we cut about half of it out yesterday when we went through our run through. But I just want to take a step back, and I want you to realize that some of this work was very personalized. Some of this work was classroom work. Some of this work was school work. Some of this work was district work. And some of this work will follow the student to college and career. And so when we talk about aligning the arrows and having everything go in the same direction and talk about a portrait of a graduate and what we want our students to know and do and understand when they leave us, a paradigm like this is so helpful in following students through their career and in helping them to be able to collect a lot of materials and select certain ones for different kinds of scenarios. So I'm just going to wrap up as I did in the first two, that the assessment components we have now, are focused on, to a large extent, on standardized tests, ELA and math, K through 8, Regents, APs. They tend to be created in pockets by individuals, teams, grade levels. I think I just kind of said this the other way around in terms of aligning the arrows. And they tend to have, individually have short-term goals. And something like a portfolio can really help tie it together. And so, we have a proud history of excellent schools. Again, I want to reiterate that we're not looking to fix anything, but we're looking to embrace the future. We have a very excellent school system with student achievement is very high, as reckoned by all of our current assessment tools. But we want to think about providing more robust and personal ways of having students exhibit what they have learned. And that, as I've already said, a clearly defined, collaboratively determined vision and mission will help us achieve that. And thank you. And we can open it up now. I'll stop.
Thank you all very much. I think Deborah has her hand up, so we'll start with her. And we will go and open it for community comments as well, if anybody has any of those once the board has asked their questions. Go ahead, Deborah.
Thanks. So I've been following digital badging for many years. And I have some concerns and I have some questions. My concerns are that school is supposed to be the place where kids can make mistakes and learn and not have those mistakes follow them into adulthood. And so, because oftentimes for many children, they will learn differently than they did when they were children and may learn more as they become older and mature. So when we have these digital badges, what happens to the children who are slow learners or who can't complete their badges? And now we have these badges basically fixed in time on the internet and immortalized for these kids. And possibly go with them into the workforce. How do we protect them, especially our most vulnerable population? How do we protect them from the abuses of the badges? That's my first question.
Okay. Do you want to go? Okay.
Yeah, sure. If anybody wants to.
No. I mean, So I think there's a couple of levels of what we've discovered over the years. One is that students in this, at least in the systems that we've done, are the owners of this work. And the idea of it is you can say, this is my collection of work. Think of it like an artist studio. Here's all my various paintings and so on that I keep. But only some of them I put out for public display. I may have things that I have. So I've got my collection in my portfolio. But in terms of what I send out to the world, what I let people know is there, that's my choice to submit and to send out there. So I might, the screen you looked at, this is my private collection, but part of what, I may not have been clear, the idea of what I send off to a college or a career or whatever else, that's going to be a much more limited set. So I'm not sending, so I've got my whole set here, but what I send to the world or to a particular interview or to, and that I'm going to put together specifically for that purpose. The other thing is that I actually think there's kind of an opportunity in the other direction. We've done a lot of work with urban schools. They find the badging as a sense of achievement. If we can take the accomplishments of every student, kids in, for whatever reason, it's less the, are you ahead or behind? Are you on grade level? It's sort of like, we're particularly seeing that this year, as lots of kids have not been able to be in school for health, internet reason, whatever, they can't do as much. A lot of schools are saying, okay, it's fine. Here's what you were able to accomplish in the 2021 year. We've got this record so we can tell where you are, but the fact that it's not you didn't get a failing grade, that's a separate issue. Grades still exist, but this badge is telling me, here's what you have accomplished. Here's how far you have gotten. So anyway, that's our experience with it. It's not to say there hasn't been any negative experiences out there, but that's what we've done. Sorry, went on too long.
No, that's great. I appreciate that you pointed that out. Thank you. And the other question I had is,
Deb, could I just go in for 1 sec? You mentioned the internet, so I just want to also be clear that just because they're digital doesn't mean that they're available to everybody. I mean, they're personal student records, and just like any other record, it's this, as David said, the student owns it, and it can be. That's why it's the select is the middle part. It's collect select for various purposes. And in terms of students whose growth patterns are different, would you rather have a piece that was incomplete, from a certain grade level, or would you rather have a C? So I think there's the same kind of, lens there. And you also heard Tony when he spoke about, I thought it was one of the, the highlights of the many good things he said, just because you're a second year oboe student doesn't mean you have to play level 2. You could play level 6, or you could play level 1, and you could be very proud of it based on what you do.
okay, so if I may follow up with a different question. We still operate as a country with the ESSA assessments in grades 3 through 8, and then again in middle school and high school, and the Regents exams here in New York. How and Rhode Island apparently still has the ESSA requirements, but not the Regents exams. So unfortunately, what gets tested is what gets taught. So how do we most effectively take advantage of the portfolio system and the digital badges when we know we also have to ensure that the students pass these Regents exams in order to graduate? How does that, can those coexist?
I'll start. I'll try to be brief. I think, first of all of those assessments can be included in the digital portfolio. One of the things that we talked about was multiple measures, and there's nothing wrong with a Regents test. Regents test is a wonderful thing. But it's only one lens on a student's achievement. So they can coexist very, very comfortably. The other thing is, and this would take a longer time to get into, but there have been a lot of states like Rhode Island and countries that have moved away from standardized testing. And the way that they've done it is by having students take standardized tests like the PISA and doing very well on it, even though they're not teaching to those tests. In general, and I know this is a generalization, but there's a lot of evidence out there that when we teach kids and they learn and they grow, that they do well on these tests.
And just briefly, yes, these need to coexist. I mean, you're right. They're not going away. We have worked with schools in lots of states where, this sort of thing is important. So the question is, what do we want to use which assessment for? So standardized tests and so on tell us certain things. They don't measure all the subjects. For example, every state has a standard for students should be able to listen and speak proficiently. Nobody has a standardized test for that. So, how do we measure that? So sometimes where the focus on the portfolio side might be, yes, you have to do your Regents, but let's look at the other things that we think are important, or elements like citizenship or entrepreneurship or whatever else. So like Dr. Miele said, you can say, if we're looking at my overall English skills, my Regents test tells me something, and that's great. But are you also able to do the other things that are important? Can you write a longer essay? Can you do an oral presentation? So think of it as, the arrow with, or the toolkit. You've got lots of different things that you could use. It's not an either, it doesn't have to be an either or kind of situation. But what we are saying is we can start to elevate the importance of some of these other things that aren't on the Regents. If we really think it's important for students to be able to present well, this is a strategy to say, let's see you do it. Let's see an example.
Do you mind if I just jump in real quick? Good morning, everyone. I think it's still morning. Yes, it is. All right, good. I want to thank everyone for being here today. This is a very important conversation, certainly a very important topic. I want to thank Dr. Mioli in advance for really setting the foundation for curriculum instruction and assessment, which of course is in his title as well. I think today's meeting really is about what other possibilities are out there that we can explore for our students when it comes to assessing them, to seeing where they are. And I'm not saying this is all we do, as far as, just have a paper and pencil test, have a quiz, but there are significant ways, other ways for us to assess where kids are. And we're talking about high performing students, we're talking about our students who are struggling, and all the students in between, whether it's our L's, whether it's our students with disabilities, it's everybody. And the beauty of this is, as we explore this and we become more familiar with this, and as Dr. Mioli said before, we're talking about interdisciplinary opportunities where we marry different content areas together to assess kids. That's the beauty of this. So for some teachers, this isn't new and different. So certainly for our music teachers, right, and for our physical education teachers and our coaches, it's all about performance-based assessments, right? And this is something I really want us to explore further. I want us to move in this direction, slow. We're not going to, jump off a 100-foot cliff and everyone's going to have digital badges by 2023. That's not the way we're looking to go. But I do think it's important that we take a deep dive into this and see how we could assess our kids, sit beside our kids, and really guide them, and gives us really great information for us to make sure they get everything they need and deserve. So I think I really appreciate this opportunity for us to explore this and have some conversations. And I have to go to an observation right now to go scare some teachers. So anyway, not that I would scare them. So I appreciate it. It was great seeing everybody, and have a wonderful day. And Tony, it's great seeing you. I can listen to you all day. Take it easy.
Thank you, Dr. Huntz. I believe Nora and Larry. Good job. Nora and Larry both had their hands up. I'm not actually sure who was first of the two of you. Do you know? Larry? He's the other direction on my screen from where you're pointing.
Right, yeah, mine too. She's just pointing nowhere. But anyway, this was very interesting, and I appreciate all the work that went into it. I think the badges will very much tie into our vision and mission and profile of a student. I do have and I think this might be the absolute best thing out there, but I'm not sure it actually, serves everybody to the same extent. The first slide was, assessment on the process of making judgments. And when you make judgments, you have implicit bias. And when you're sitting on a bench next to somebody, if that person isn't speaking the same language as you, it's hard for you to assess them. And I don't mean the same language by they're speaking French and you're speaking English, but there are generational differences in the way people speak. There are different idioms. There are different things that come on. My question is, if Keith Haring was a high school student and painting his stuff, would he have gotten a good assessment or a poor assessment? Because it wasn't what people did then. And it wasn't, the same sort of thing happens, in music too. Most of the kids here who are get very good assessment in music have private lessons. But now you're coming up with a portfolio and somebody is not performing as well as somebody else. And it's because they don't have the same resources that another person has. students in special ed. In other words, I had a son who could do a math problem. He does not have the verbal skills to explain how he did the math problem. So by saying you have to reflect and explain why you did your art, that isn't possible for some people. So how do you deal with the people who have those sort of challenges without, again, making them feel somehow like they're not, performing up to status and they can't earn a badge and they can't do all of these other things. And I know, I'm always talking about this small percentage of people who get left behind and fall through the cracks. But I think that this particular method of assessment might have a better ability to catch them. And I just sort of want to know how those people get dealt with. And I'm sorry, it was a long-winded multi-question question, but I'll leave it there.
I
stunned you all.
You stunned
Well,
us.
I think Tony's going to answer about one of those comments.
I was going to ask him too, but I didn't want to throw him under the bus.
No. I would jump on what you just asked about the different levels, and because someone takes a private lesson or whatever, and that goes in whatever field we're talking about. In my high school orchestra, I have students learning a level 2 Nismus solo and sitting next to a student learning a level 6 Nismus solo. Those students get assessed on the ability level that they are attaining at the moment and the growth that they do in the level that they perform in a set rubric and performance evaluation like we're talking about. Just because I have students that have performed in Carnegie Hall solo recitals, and I have students that don't bring their instrument home every day. So we have a range of things that go on, but I do not, and I don't think any teacher would compare those two students to each other in a performance-based assessment saying, how can I compare this kid that's been going to Juilliard pre-college for 5 years to the student that's your normal school district educated music student? The average music student, and I'm going to be music oriented because that's what I do, is if a student graduates at level 4 in New York State, that is about the average around the state. The fact that we have students that play at a higher level towards the collegiate level is a blessing.
I understand that. I guess my question is, who gets the solo in the major works? And I may be frozen because it looks like everybody else is frozen.
No, you're not.
He's frozen.
Tony, so Tony's frozen. I will say that, solos, that we actually don't do a lot of solos in this district at concerts. We do mostly ensemble work. But the NISMA students, they do not all take private lessons. That's one of the great things about that system. And in terms of the art, I think you were talking about like Keith Haring, and what our art teachers do is we discuss a lot of the work. Most of the work is discussion and the ability of the individual to make choices and to be able to evaluate themselves and to take chances. Our arts program is really about taking chances, and it grows as the students get older, right from kindergarten even, being able to take chances, and you see that in the art of the students, and they also reflect on what they're doing. To your point about that, they do understand what they're doing. They understand the principles of art. So I could see it when you go to an exhibit, maybe you're seeing the final result, but the process is very important in our assessment and evaluation of the students.
I just want to add that, Tony and all the art teachers and all of our teachers are forced to grade those students, that level 6 student who's played in Carnegie Hall and the level 2 student who sits next to him or her. And so again, we're talking about, I think, trying to find better ways of doing things, or multiple ways of doing things, not one or the other.
I understand, and I'm saying that I thought that this was a better thing, but I still think there are value judgments and implicit biases in any form of assessment. And the question is, how do we best work around that? And maybe that ties in with the NYU work or something like that. But it's very hard for somebody who has very little cultural understanding of somebody else to properly evaluate even the way they speak, even the way they communicate and everything else. And then my other question was about the special ed aspect of the people who just cannot articulate what they're doing, but it doesn't mean they're not doing something meaningful.
Just a real 2-second thing on it. In assessment practice, most of the researchers will say any major high stakes decision shouldn't be based on a single person or a single test. So the best way to combat what you're talking about, at least in the first part, is by having multiple voices in that assessment. So knowing full well, here's a teacher and here's a special ed, classroom teacher and special ed teacher working together. You're absolutely right. These are absolutely valid things to address. It does mean thinking about assessment a little bit differently and adding some, and there are some good practices out there. Let's just put it that way. But you're absolutely right to bring up the point. It comes up over and over again.
Nora,
you.
I think that's your turn if Larry's ready.
I'm done.
All right, thank you. And thanks, Larry. You actually covered some of my questions, getting back to the bench from the beginning and the word judgment following, here's the bench where we sit and talk and assess, but it's always the judgment and always some form of subjectivity. And with NISBA, as I recall, my kids were in NISBA, and I remember, and I just don't know how you ever eliminate this. There are always judges who are notorious for grading and the full panoply of components of that grade, but somehow the number grade always ended up lower than their counterparts. And it was just known when you went to NISBA, when you went to that high school in Manhasset, you hoped you didn't get a particular judge. And this was true for, various music teachers that my daughter who did voice and my son who did piano and cello, it was across the board. But NISMA, as I recall, is optional. So of course there are, you're giving even if they're in NISBA or they're not doing NISBA, I keep getting confused with NISBA and NISMA. But for NISMA, they're doing, still doing grades, of course. But I really had a question for Dr. Nicudella? Jula? I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm sorry.
You got it, but David's fine.
David, okay, thank you. In the districts, in terms of that one or the other that Dave was just talking about, we've all been kind of talking about, like, is this in the districts where you have actually worked and brought this portfolio method in, like how, and Mike said before he left, this isn't something we're doing next year, but what is the process like? It seems like, yes, the music teachers or department is doing it, but it's really so different than what our staff has been doing forever. And how do you implement it? And I don't mean like, it's going to take X amount of, years and months, but it just seems like I think there's a lot of really wonderful things that you brought up, and it really looks at the whole student, the whole child. And I could see it being tailored for kids with special needs. And like, there's a really lot of great things about it. But the reality is from where we're sitting, we're in a district, and I don't think we're different than others. We're notwithstanding a worldwide pandemic, we're still giving kids grades. Okay, so we're going from a mentality that wants to grade students for how they're performing on remote learning that they've never had before to something that is, in my opinion, like really far away. And even if we all care about kids, and I think all our teachers wouldn't be teaching if they didn't really care about the kids, but to go from what people are used to this, how do you get people there, and how long does it take? If you can answer that.
No, that's an excellent question, and the process is important. So briefly, here's the sort of process we've described in a nutshell. First is the work you're doing now. What's your vision of a graduate? What's important to you at the district level and also at the course level? What are we expecting of a graduate? What are we expecting out of 8th grade English, say? What are the critical things? And most of the time when you work it through, there's a few key elements. There's a few things, English is about reading, writing, speaking, listening, if we can capture those kinds of elements. Then this next part is to build on the assessments you already have. So a common method we'll have is that we'll ask teachers, what are three or four assessments that you already give? We're not asking you to change anything, but that you already give that would capture the critical elements of what goes on in your class. And when we ask teachers this, the final exam might be one, but they'll often say, hey, we do this, mock trial that's really important. Or at the elementary level, we do things, we prepare the following things for parent-teacher conferences. So, and so you build the portfolio from that. Let's look at what the kids are already doing. And one of the most powerful things is just simply that collection. If we look at what our kids are doing and look at the variety of work, then it becomes clearer the first round, you may not do any assessment directly. You might just start by collecting. And then if you've got the range of work to say, like, is this good enough? Where is our levels? What do we want to do? And that's when the development of here's what our expectation is and how we start to meet it. What a lot of schools can get caught up in is spending forever trying to get the vision exactly right before they introduce it. It's got to be more of an iterative process. Here's our first crack at what a vision is. Let's look at what the kids are actually doing. So let's pull some sample work. Let's ask the teachers what assessments they already have towards that end. And then say, okay, how close are we? Where are we matching? Let's look at the different, a sampling of different kinds of kids, you might say, let's look at all the kids whose last names start with M and, get the range of that. So we're building on what's already there. What I think is important is to note is that this isn't necessarily a change in practice as expanding what's valued and valuable. If we say to the district and the parents and everybody, we're not just going to rely on a test score as the only thing. We're not saying it's going away, but we want, like I was saying before, every kid to be able to speak well. We want every kid to understand what career options are. We want kids to demonstrate citizenship. Great. How do we elevate that up to the same level? That's what we're trying to get at here. So, but it's building on what you've already got in place. I don't know if I hope I answered part of your question at least, but it has, the transition is usually easier. There's a lot of amazing things already happening in your schools. And what we're doing is honoring and building on that. Where's the stuff where the kids can really shine? And how can we give that the same recognition that a Regents exam, for example, does? So that's I've written whole books on the whole process. So, but that's the sort of quick sort of key elements to me. I don't know. I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, that answered some of it. I mean, I think I would assume that it's sort of different in every district that you go into. Does the whole district go, or you go with one school at a time? I mean, or does it vary? Like, is it like, say when we do Ruler, you're familiar with the Ruler program, probably have talked to David about Ruler. With Ruler, we started out with one elementary school. Now we're growing it. But is this something where it's sort of a test drive or a sampling or a key entry kind of thing?
Pilot projects are very common, one way or another, depending on the specific need. So a district will say, now in Rhode Island, it happened to be a lot of high school work because it was a new high school requirement for the class of 2008 when it was first implemented. But
being what, portfolios or what?
Portfolios became a graduation requirement for the class. So the high school, many of the districts started at the high school because that was the immediate need. Other districts that we've worked with said, we really want to focus on elementary level literacy issues, and that's where we did that. So
does all of Rhode Island do this now, or is it, you say Rhode Island, you're talking about the districts you work with?
It's a graduate, yes, no, it's every district every student in every district has to complete performance-based graduation requirements. Whether there are different forms of it, portfolio, senior projects, but yes, that's been on the books for the last, 13 years now.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I believe I saw Julie with a hand up. Julie, did you change your mind?
Actually, my question was answered as you went through the process more, so thank you.
That's great. That's the best way to have questions answered.
Can I just add to that last
Of course, go
Laura's
ahead.
question? Thanks. So I just want to zoom us back up to 30,000 feet for a minute, and then we can come back down. I want us to remember that the reason that we decided to talk about curriculum instruction assessment was because we're looking at vision. We're looking at how we can make our great district better. And so we're not, you know, one of the reasons I had Tony and Kevin here is because we're doing some of this stuff already. And again, there's no agenda to suddenly have digital portfolios tomorrow. I just wanted to show what the opportunities are, particularly, and again, this is my second point for 30,000 feet, because we all now have devices. Every student and every educator has a device, thanks to you and the community. And so what would not have been anywhere near as easy to accomplish 12 months ago is now really something that we could embrace if we choose to, in part or in whole, or you know, in places or in toto.
I have a question. If I don't think I'm jumping a line on anybody, but
Rachel,
yeah.
can I speak? Because I'm about to go into a doctor.
Yes.
I got into my car. I'm sorry. I
No,
just
go ahead.
wanted to, okay. So I just wanted to first thank the Dr. Mioli for bringing up the point that this is the 30,000, you know, view, because I think it is, and what Dr. Hines said, it is very important that we realize that this is part of a bigger picture type of vision work that we are starting. And I think it's great. And I thank you for bringing to us types of things that we could be doing as we start thinking about our vision. So I just wanted to really just say that thank you for bringing that up, because I think when I actually, for me personally, when I first saw the agenda, I thought, okay, wait, I'm a little confused how this is assessment, but this was very good in helping me understand how this could be a big picture type of presentation. And as you know, I am a process person, right? So and thank you, Nora, for asking the process question. I guess the other part of the process question is there's obviously a cost associated with this, right? So I'm curious if we have, as we're planning for the future, if we can get a cost on what it would take. I know we have the devices, which definitely was a huge cost, but what other types of costs would we as a board have to consider to put something like this in place? That's my kind of question.
I can just say we have numbers for you, and I've discussed, I've included some of them in my budget for next year for consideration as in the draft. For that and things that we talked about in curriculum and instruction as well.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we'll see it in the budget numbers. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And interestingly, my question was actually probably just the broader version of Emily's question. Sweetie, you gotta wait 1 second. Which is, what are the overall hurdles to putting something like this in place? And I think part of that is cost, but I imagine there's also some retraining and some mindset shift work. And I don't know if there's restructuring of the way groups work together, although I know our teachers are collaborating already. Are there other hurdles that we have to get over to put this kind of thing in place, other than where it is in place already?
Well, again, I'll start. All of the above. You know, we're looking at vision and mission. We are saying that we want to look at how we're doing things, and we want to, as well as we're doing them, we want to do them better. We know we can always do better. So we can start in many different places. And one of the great lenses that David brings to this is that he's worked in a lot of different places. And I think many of you know that we had digital portfolios for a while at Sousa, and David worked with us there. And so all those things that you just said were definitely hurdles in terms of moving forward. any change is going to involve some hurdles, because education is a lot of things, but it's not quick to change. And so I think we have to look, I think it's my job to bring some of those possible changes to you, and for us to consider, along with the community, which of them we feel have merit and can help us have more students attain more mastery in more places and feel better about themselves, and what they can do when they graduate. And you know, that's why curriculum, instruction, and assessment are all linked together as well. And that's what I hope to start talking about in the next sets of meetings, is how when we start looking at how all these things go together, there's a lot of decisions to be made, and there's a lot of interconnecting pieces.
Thank you. An additional question connected to that, and for this, I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, since we don't have a lot of comments coming from the community, but I could envision a criticism here or a question that says, oh, I see how digital portfolios would work in the arts. That makes sense. But in hard subjects like science and math, you either know it or you don't, and you just test the students, and you know, they should know their social studies facts, and they should know their math, they should know their science, and we need to test them. We don't need digital portfolios there. We don't need any alternate kind of assessment. As I said, I'm playing a little bit devil's advocate here, but what's the response to that on rolling out this kind of thing in the core curriculum? And are we already rolling it out in the core curriculum in some ways?
I'll start, and I'm turning it over to Dave. I'm sure he can answer this better than I can. I think, yes, of course, we're covering it in the core curriculum already, but I think it gives us a lot more options, and a lot more, as I kind of tried to summarize before, a lot more options for personalization, a lot more options for aligning our arrows so that we're all looking to accomplish the same things. And I think it gives us a latitude that we don't have now. We tend to be academics focused. That's what schools have tended to be. And there are a lot of questions about whether that's what we should be. Are knowledge and facts that important anymore when you can Google anything at any time? And again, I don't want to make this a polemic. Of course, all those things are important. But do we want to move away from that and look at a graduate who has other kinds of skills that can't be tested in multiple choice and short answer? I think that's my short answer.
So building on that, I'm sorry to cut you off. Is that why that you would say the testing and the digital portfolio are two things that come together because you're actually assessing two different things, even though you're in one subject?
Dave, I'll let you go. I know you got this one.
Yeah.
If you look at, say, the standards in any given subject area at the state level or organizations like the Next Generation Science Standards, they will all tell you you can't cover all the facts. There was one study that there is more vocabulary in a high school biology textbook than a first-year Spanish textbook. Kids are actually expected to know more, that there's more language covered there. So what do you really want kids to take out of these classes? It's the ability to go beyond those facts and interpret and be able to do that. Culturally, not just here, everywhere, you think of what is a test. It's a set of facts, I need to spit them back and so on. But what we're really talking about here, if when we go deeper into what education means, it's about applying those facts. It's about interpreting. It's about analyzing. It's about those other kinds of skills. You need the facts as maybe a foundation in order to do that, but we need to be able to measure those other kinds of skills, which, again, the key thing, years ago, one of the key assessment things that just sort of stays with me is you have to match the assessment, the test, to what it is you want to measure. So if all you want to measure are facts, and that's one thing to do, and that's fine. But if you want to fulfill the visions that you guys are talking about, as I understand it, and as other districts have, you need something more. Now, exactly what that is, that's going to depend on what it is you're trying to get at. But the reality is, while a factual understanding is, as the math people put it, might be necessary, but it's not sufficient. So how do we get at those other things? How do we get at those skills that we all agree are really important? And a general strategy on a performance assessment, the old analogy was, if you wanted to know if a kid could ride a bike, would you give them a standardized test to do that? So we know that you could, that it's entirely possible to do so, but it may not be the best method of it. It's an understandable question because that's where we're culturally trained to think about what assessments are, but go a little deeper, and that's what we're getting at.
And I just want to say one more thing, because it was one of the slides I cut out, but good assessment is good instruction. Think about some of the things that you've learned as you were being assessed. I think, there's a whole nexus there with failure and achievement. And I think that's an important point to bring up too.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands. Does anybody else have any further questions for our guests today?
No, just wanted to say thank you. I didn't start out by saying that, but I was remiss. Thank you very much.
Is there anything that the four of you would want to add? I heard Dr. Mioli say that you cut down when you started discussing. Is there something that you left out that now hasn't come out in questioning that we should really understand about this, or about Port Washington's plans for the future this way, or at least where we want our plans to be, we think, since we're in the process of doing this vision and mission work?
I'm waiting 7 seconds. I'll just take the opportunity to try to tie it all together again. Schools are all about curriculum instruction and assessment. And, we've talked about Finland, we've talked about the arts, we've talked about interdisciplinary learning, we've talked about standards, we've talked about a lot of different things in the last 3 months. And I think that, assessment in many ways drives the other two. And so it's a big topic, and we could go on forever. As David said, he's written a number of books about it, and I'm sure he could answer this one better than I. But it's really about, we need to decide what's important to us. We need to align our arrows, and then we need to look at how these three work together, and how we can make them work better. And again, I'm not talking about fixing, I'm talking about embracing. It's a futures oriented thing that we're doing. Vision and mission, we're looking ahead. And it's an important thing to do. Other people have done it. And I think it's a great thing that we're doing that here.
Thank you. Nora, I see you unmuted. Do you have something you want to add?
I just wanted to say thank you very much to everyone, the guests for today, and thank you for the presentation. It was very informative.
Thank you.
Yeah. Glad to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming.
And I'd also
Thank
like
you.
to thank Dr. Mioli on behalf of me and Tony for allowing us to speak. Thank you.
Thank you all.
I think with that, we are done for today, but thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Dr. Mioli, for arranging this conversation and, laying this groundwork for us to move forward with the vision and mission work that I know Dr. Hines wants to be doing here. And I think the staff wants to be doing as well. Thank you all for joining us. We will see you in March. The date is yet to be set for the next curriculum committee meeting, but it will be on the calendar in March and we will announce it publicly soon. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, you too. Bye-bye.